On the 1st of July, 2025, a robotic telescope sitting quietly in the mountains of Chile blinked awake, scanned the sky like it does every single night, and caught something that should not have been there. A faint moving dot crawling across a field of stars in a way that no comet, no asteroid, no ordinary object in our solar system is supposed to move. Within hours, alarms started going off inside NASA's Planetary Defense Network, because this object was not orbiting the sun. It was passing through. It had come from somewhere else entirely, from outside our solar system, from the vast black nothing between the stars, and it was heading straight through our cosmic backyard at a speed of over 137,000 miles per hour. Scientists gave it a name: 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever confirmed in human history. And almost immediately, something about it did not add up. If this were just a rock, a chunk of ice tumbling through space, nobody outside a handful of astronomers would care. But within weeks, the world's most powerful telescopes, Hubble, James Webb, and eventually a small army of NASA spacecraft scattered across the solar system, all turned their eyes toward this single object. And what they found sparked a debate that has now split the scientific community in two. On one side, mainstream astronomers calling it the strangest comet they have ever studied. On the other side, a Harvard astrophysicist standing in front of television cameras, calmly telling the public that this thing might not be a comet at all, that it might be artificial, that it might be a spacecraft. And by the time you finish this video, you will understand exactly why NASA delayed showing the world its best pictures of this object for weeks, why the government shutdown made things worse, and why even now, in the middle of 2026, scientists still cannot fully explain what they are looking at. Let's rewind to the beginning, because the timeline here matters. 3I Atlas was first detected by the NASA-funded ATLAS Survey Telescope, which stands for Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, a network built specifically to catch dangerous objects heading toward Earth before they get here. The moment this object was flagged, astronomers ran the numbers on its trajectory, the path it was taking through space, and the shape of that path told them everything. Most comets and asteroids in our solar system travel in closed loops, ellipses, bound forever by the sun's gravity, circling around again and again for millions of years. 3I Atlas was doing something completely different. Its orbit was hyperbolic, an open curved path that comes in once and never returns. When astronomers traced that path backward in time, it led directly out of the solar system entirely, confirming beyond doubt that this object was born around a different star, in a different solar system, possibly billions of years before our sun even existed, and had been drifting silently through interstellar space for who knows how long before gravity finally pulled it close enough for us to notice. Only two objects like this had ever been detected before. The first was Oumuamua in 2017, a strange cigar-shaped or pancake-shaped object that tumbled through our solar system so fast that telescopes barely caught a glimpse before it vanished, leaving behind more questions than answers, including a wild acceleration that some scientists, including the very same Harvard astrophysicist we mentioned earlier, argued could only be explained by artificial propulsion. The second was Borisov in 2019, which behaved much more like a normal, if unusually pristine, comet. Now here comes the third one, and unlike its two predecessors, 3I Atlas gave scientists something they never had before: enough time and enough brightness to actually study it in detail with almost every major telescope humanity has ever built. And that is exactly when the panic really started, because the closer NASA looked, the stranger this thing became. But first, let's talk about size, because even that simple question turned into a mystery. Early estimates from Hubble put the upper limit of the object's icy core, its nucleus, at around 3.5 miles across. But scientists also admitted it could be as small as 1,400 feet, a difference so massive that astronomers still cannot agree on how big this visitor actually is. To put that in perspective, if it is on the larger end, and we're talking about an object potentially miles wide, hurtling through our solar system faster than almost anything humanity has ever tracked. And yet, even our most advanced space telescope could not pin down its exact size, because a bright, glowing cloud of gas and dust called a coma kept obscuring the solid nucleus underneath. One astronomer who took some of the most detailed measurements of the object's size put it bluntly: if the nucleus had been genuinely large, there would have been a visible spike of brightness right at the center of every image, and there simply was not one. That absence became the entire basis for the size limit scientists eventually settled on, an indirect measurement built from the lack of a signal rather than a clean, direct reading, which tells you just how difficult this object has been to pin down from the very start. Even knowing the size matters far beyond simple curiosity, because comparing the dimensions of 3I Atlas to the first two interstellar visitors, Oumuamua and Borisov, is one of the only ways scientists have to understand whether interstellar objects in general tend to be small, or whether something this size might actually be common in the vast population of them still waiting to be discovered. Then Hubble captured something that made astronomers do a double take. Instead of a simple round cloud of dust surrounding the object, the image showed something shaped almost like a teardrop, an asymmetrical glowing cocoon streaking off to one side. Comets are supposed to develop tails that point away from the sun, pushed back by solar radiation and the solar wind, plain and simple physics that every schoolchild studying comets learns. But 3I Atlas broke that rule almost immediately. Telescopes began detecting what is called an anti-tail, a jet of material shooting out toward the sun in the completely wrong direction. This anti-tail was not some tiny visual glitch either. Later observations from Hubble, taken in January 2026, showed this anti-tail stretching out an almost unbelievable 400,000 kilometers from the nucleus, directly toward the sun, longer than the distance between the Earth and the Moon. When scientists applied special image processing filters to strip away the surrounding glow, they found not just one strange jet, but a triple jet structure, 3 distinct streams of material blasting out of this object in a pattern nobody has ever documented on a natural comet before. And then the chemistry results came back, and that is when things got even weirder. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope and the Sphere-X Observatory both turned their infrared instruments on 3I Atlas in August of 2025, and what they found inside that glowing coma was almost unheard of. An extraordinarily high ratio of carbon dioxide to water, far higher than typical solar system comets, along with water ice, water vapor, carbon monoxide, and a rare compound called carbonyl sulfide. But the detail that really caught scientists off guard involved something called deuterium, a heavier form of hydrogen. In the water coming off this comet, researchers measured deuterium levels roughly 1,000 times higher than the average found across the cosmos, and more than 10 times higher than any comet or meteorite ever measured in our own solar system. In the methane detected around the object, that anomaly was even more extreme. Deuterium levels nearly 1,000 times higher than anything found on any planet in our solar system. Whatever this object is made of, it appears to have formed under conditions completely unlike anything we have in our own cosmic neighborhood, which honestly makes sense since it came from another star system entirely. But the scale of the anomaly still stunned researchers who study comet chemistry for a living. On top of that, some analyses picked up traces of nickel in the object's spectrum, without the accompanying iron that almost always shows up alongside it in natural comets. On Earth, nickel typically appears without iron through a specific industrial refining process. Scientists studying the object insist this can absolutely happen naturally too, through certain chemical pathways in space ice, but the detail was strange enough that it made headlines around the world, with some outlets breathlessly suggesting it as evidence of artificial material. Now here is where the story stops being just a science story and turns into something people are genuinely panicking about. In November of 2025, Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, the same scientist who previously argued that Oumuamua might have been an alien probe, began publishing a growing list of what he called anomalies surrounding 3I Atlas. That list eventually grew to 9, then 12, then 15 separate oddities. He pointed to the object's trajectory, which happens to align within just a few degrees of the plane that Earth and the other planets orbit within, statistically unlikely for a random visitor from interstellar space, giving it what he described as almost suspiciously good access to fly close to several planets. He pointed to a sudden and unexpected brightening of the object as it neared the sun, one that made it appear distinctly bluer in color than expected, the opposite of what dust reflecting sunlight should do, which led him to publicly ask whether the object might be generating its own heat from some kind of internal power source. And most dramatically of all, he calculated that the object's closest approach to Jupiter, scheduled for March 16, 2026, would bring it to a distance almost perfectly matching Jupiter's Hill radius, the theoretical boundary where a smaller object could be captured into a stable orbit around the giant planet. Loeb openly speculated that 3I Atlas could be a mothership, releasing smaller probes, or in his words, mini-drones, into orbit around Jupiter as it passed by, before continuing on its journey out of the solar system forever. He appeared on national television, gave interviews comparing the object's behavior to a detective investigating a crime scene, and assigned probability numbers to each individual anomaly, arguing that even if any single oddity could be explained away naturally, the sheer combination of all of them together made a purely natural explanation statistically unlikely. It is exactly the kind of claim that spreads like wildfire online. A serious Harvard scientist, not a random conspiracy account, suggesting publicly that an alien spacecraft the size of a city might currently be flying through our solar system. And then, right in the middle of all this, NASA went silent, as 3I Atlas approached its closest point to the sun. In late October of 2025, the United States government shut down, a record-breaking closure stretching from October 1st all the way into mid-November. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, along with most of its public communications teams, was hit hard. New images and data from the comet's most critical flyby period, when it should have been at its brightest and most active, simply stopped being released to the public. For weeks, the agency that had spent months confidently reassuring everyone that this object posed absolutely no danger to Earth went dark, exactly when public curiosity and public anxiety was at its peak. Online communities filled the silence with speculation. Was NASA hiding something? Had they found proof the object was artificial? Was the shutdown actually being used as cover? When NASA finally did break its silence in a live briefing on November 19, 2025, officials openly admitted just how strange the timing had been. NASA's Associate Administrator for its Science Mission Directorate said she was almost amused by how much the public had been speculating while the agency legally could not respond. And then they finally showed the images, the highest resolution pictures yet of 3I Atlas, taken around the time of its closest approach to the Sun, captured using an unlikely source, the half-meter telescope aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, a spacecraft built to photograph the surface of Mars, now repurposed to catch a passing interstellar visitor from 18.5 million miles away. NASA revealed that at least 20 different instruments across the solar system had been involved in tracking this object, an unprecedented, almost frantic mobilization of nearly every asset the agency had access to. Hubble, Webb, the exoplanet hunting TESS satellite, the Swift Observatory, SphereX, the Perseverance rover on Mars, which paused its own mission to snap a picture of the comet in the Martian sky, the Mars orbiter, MAVEN, the Europa Clipper spacecraft, observing for 7 straight hours from over 100 million miles away. The Lucy spacecraft, on its way to study asteroids near Jupiter, capturing images from 240 million miles out. The Psyche mission. The Parker Solar Probe, flying closer to the Sun than any spacecraft in history, catching a unique angle on the comet as it swept past. Even the joint European and American SOHO Solar Observatory got a glimpse. Despite everything, NASA has been consistent and clear about one central fact through all of this. 3. I-Atlas never posed any threat to Earth at any point. Its closest approach to our planet came in at roughly 1.8 astronomical units away, about 170 million miles, nearly twice the distance between the Earth and the Sun. This was never a story about a comet on a collision course, but that has done surprisingly little to calm public nerves, because in an era of alien conspiracy theories, ancient astronaut documentaries, and endless online speculation about unidentified objects, the idea of a genuinely unexplainable visitor from another star system flying past Jupiter and releasing something into orbit proved to be an irresistible story, one that kept climbing to the top of trending pages for months afterward. While all of this was unfolding in the United States, the story was catching fire on the other side of the Atlantic too. British outlets and astronomy publications began running their own galleries of the best images captured of 3I Atlas, tracking its journey from that very first blurry dot spotted by the Atlas Survey Telescope in Chile, all the way through the Very Large Telescope's observations in July. The Gemini South Telescope images from Cerro Pachon showing the tail stretching longer and longer as the comet grew more active, and eventually the January 2026 images captured by NASA's exoplanet hunting TESS satellite, which caught the object as nothing more than a faint moving point of light with a short visible tail drifting silently across a crowded field of background stars. British science communicators pointed out something that made the whole event feel even more historic. At its brightest, 3I Atlas was still roughly 100 times fainter than anything the human eye could detect without a telescope. This was never something anyone was going to casually spot by looking up at the night sky. Every single image the public saw required powerful, specialized equipment, and in some cases, spacecraft, stationed tens or hundreds of millions of miles away from Earth, simply to catch a glimpse of it. That gap between how enormous this story became online and how genuinely invisible the object was to ordinary skywatchers is part of what made the whole saga feel almost eerie. Millions of people around the world were reading headlines, watching video breakdowns, and debating whether an alien mothership was quietly slipping past Jupiter, and yet not a single person on Earth could simply step outside, look up, and see it for themselves. Everything the public knew came filtered through NASA press releases, scientific papers, and, increasingly, competing narratives from scientists who could not agree with each other. On one side, university researchers publishing peer-reviewed papers describing a comet behaving in extreme but ultimately explainable ways. On the other, a single high-profile professor with a large public following repeatedly appearing on television expanding his list of anomalies almost every few weeks, and openly comparing the object to a crime scene that needed detective work to solve. Some of his fellow scientists pushed back hard, arguing publicly that his method of assigning tiny statistical probabilities to unpredicted events was scientifically meaningless, since almost anything can be made to look improbable after the fact if you simply did not predict it in advance. That exact criticism, that none of these so-called anomalies were ever forecast ahead of time, became one of the most repeated counter-arguments circulating among astronomers throughout the entire debate. So who is actually right here? The honest answer, and the one that most working planetary scientists will give you, is that the vast majority of the astronomy community believes 3I Atlas is exactly what it appears to be, an unusually large, unusually active, and genuinely ancient comet from another star system, behaving in ways that are strange to us, mainly because we have simply never had the chance to study an interstellar comet this closely before. Scientists studying the data point out that every single one of the so-called anomalies has a plausible natural explanation, once you consider that this object formed under wildly different conditions, around a different star, likely billions of years before our own solar system existed. The anti-tail, they argue, is simply large dust particles, roughly 100 times bigger than typical cometary dust, being pushed toward the sun by the heat of the day side of the nucleus, before radiation pressure eventually redirects them into a normal tail. The unusual nickel signature, they say, likely comes from a known chemical pathway that occurs naturally in certain types of comet ice, not industrial. Refining. The alignment with the ecliptic plane, statisticians point out, is far less unlikely than it first sounds once you run the actual math on how such objects can enter a solar system. And the blue brightening near perihelion, while still being studied, has precedent in other unusually active comets, shedding fresh, less weathered material as they heat up. But here's the detail that keeps this story alive and keeps millions of people refreshing NASA's website for updates even now, months later. Nobody has been able to definitively close the book on it. As of the most recent observations in the first half of 2026, 3I Atlas has already passed its closest approach to Jupiter, sweeping by on March 16th, and scientists are still waiting on crucial data from NASA's Juno spacecraft, which was in position to observe that exact flyby. The object is now heading away from us, back out into the emptiness of interstellar space, fading with every passing week, never to return to our solar system again in any of our lifetimes. Researchers tracking its brightness curve as it leaves say that, so far, there has been no evidence in the data of anything resembling artificial light, no strange flashing, no impossible signals, just a comet, growing dimmer exactly as you would expect. And yet, the debate has not stopped. Just weeks ago, updated Hubble images continued to show that same mysterious triple-jet structure, still unexplained in full detail, still fueling arguments on both sides. What makes this entire saga genuinely unsettling, whichever side of the debate you land on, is not really about aliens at all. It is about how little we still understand about what lies between the stars. For all of human history, everything humanity has ever launched into space, and every comet or asteroid we have ever studied, came from our own solar system, born from the same swirling disk of gas and dust that created the Earth billions of years ago. 3I Atlas did not. It formed somewhere else entirely, shaped by different chemistry, different radiation, different history, then spent an unimaginable stretch of time drifting silently through the frozen dark between star systems before gravity finally nudged it into our neighborhood, purely by chance, for the third time in recorded human history. And scientists now believe this is only the beginning. NASA officials have said publicly that as ground-based telescopes get more powerful, and especially once the agency's upcoming Near-Earth Object Surveyor mission launches, they expect to detect these interstellar visitors far more frequently in the years ahead, not once a decade, but potentially several times a year. So maybe 3I Atlas really is nothing more than an extraordinary ancient, well-traveled comet, the strangest one humanity has ever managed to study up close, breaking rules we thought were universal simply because it was built somewhere completely different from everything else we know. Or maybe, just maybe, a small but serious group of scientists are right to keep asking the uncomfortable question out loud, because if there is even the smallest chance that something engineered has quietly passed within a few 100 million miles of Earth, slipped by Jupiter and continued on its way out of our solar system without us ever fully understanding what it was, that is not a story that ends when the object fades out of view. It is a story that is really only just getting started, because whatever comes through next, and NASA is now telling us something will come through next, we will be watching far more closely than we ever have before.